the rocks. 2 days later, Alex has put his experiences at Swanbourne behind him. He was sitting outside a cafe in Sydney, the Opera House on one side, the great stretch of the harbour bridge on the other. It was the world's favourite picture postcard view, and he had seen it many times, but now he was actually in it, eating vanilla and strawberry ice cream. Yummy. And watching as the Manly ferry came gliding into the quay, scattering the smaller craft. The sun was beating down, and the sky was a dazzling blue. It was hard to believe that he was really here, and he wasn't alone. Jack had joined him the day before, bleary-eyed with jet lag, but awake and bursting with excitement the moment she saw him. It had taken her 26 hours to get here, and Alice knew she would have been worrying all the way. Jack was meant to look after him. She hated it when he was away, and this time he had never been further. As soon as she had arrived, she had made it clear that all she wanted was to get on a plane and take him back to London. Yes, it was cold and drizzling there. The English winter had already arrived. Yes, they both deserved a holiday, but it was time to go home. Jack was also eating ice cream, and although she was 28, she suddenly looked younger with her untidy red hair, lopsided smile, and her brightly coloured kangaroo t-shirt. More a big sister than a housekeeper. Oh, and above all, a friend. I don't know why it's taken so long, she was saying. It's ridiculous. By the time we get back, you'll have missed a half term. Missed half the term. They said they'd have it this afternoon. They should have had it 2 days ago. They were talking about Alex's vice versa. That morning, Jack received a call at the hotel where they were staying. They'd been given an address, a government office in Macquarie Street, just past the old Parliament building. The visa would be ready at 4 o'clock. Alice could pick it up then. Could we stay here a couple more days? Alex asked. Jack looked at him curiously. Don't you want to go home? Yes. Alex paused. I suppose so, but at the same time I'm not quite sure I'm ready to go back to school. I've been thinking about it. I'm worried I'm not going to be able to fit in. Of course you'll fit in, Alex. You've got lots of friends. They've all been missing you. Once you're back, you'll forget any other stuff ever happened. But Alex wasn't so sure. He and Jack had talked about it the evening before. After all he had been through, how could he go back to geography lessons and school lunches and being told off for running too fast down the corridor? The day MI6 had recruited him, they had built a wall between him and his past life, and he wondered if there was any way back. I've hardly been to school this year, he muttered. I'm way behind. Maybe you can get Mr. Gray to come in this Christmas, Jack suggested. Mr. Gray was the teacher who had given Alex extra tuition during the summer. You got on well with him, and he'd soon help you catch up. I don't know, Jack. Alex looked at the ice cream melting on a spoon. He wished he could explain how he felt. He didn't work for MI6 again. He was sure he didn't want to work for MI6 again. He was sure of that. But at the same time, it's 3:30, Jack said. You ought to get going. They got up and made their way along the side of the Opera House up into the Royal Botanic Gardens. The incredible park seems to contain the city rather than the other way round. Looking back at the harbour, the bustle of life below, and the gleaming skyscrapers stretched out and stretched out behind. Alice wondered how the Australians had managed to get it all so right. It was impossible not to love Sydney. And despite what Jack had said, he knew he wasn't ready yet. He wasn't yet ready to leave. Together, the two of them made their way up past the art gallery on New South Wales and into Macquarie Street, where the Parliament building stood. 2 stories high, an elegant construction of pink and white that somehow reminded Alex of the ice cream he had just eaten. Strange. The address they had been given was just beyond. A modern glass block that was presumably filled with minor government offices. The receptionist already had visitor passes waiting for them and directed them to the 4th floor and the room at the end of the corridor. I don't know why they couldn't have just put you on a plane and sent you out of here, Jack grumbled as they left the lift. Seems a lot of fuss about nothing. There was a door ahead of them. They walked through without knocking or stopped dead in their tracks. There had obviously been some sort of mistake where they were. It certainly wasn't a vice office. 2 men. Two men were talking to each other in what looked like a library with antique furniture and a Persian rug on a highly polished wooden floor. Alex's immediate impression was that the room didn't belong to the building. It was in a golden Labrador lay curled up on a cushion in front of a fireplace. One of the men was behind a desk. He was the elder of the two, wearing a shirt and jacket and no tie. His eyes were concealed behind designer sunglasses. The older man was standing by the window, his arms folded. He was in his late 20s, thin and fair-haired, dressed in an expensive suit. Oh, I'm sorry, Jack began. Not at all, Mr. Albright. The man behind the desk replied. Please, come in. We're looking for the vice office, Jack said. Sit down. I take it Alex is with you? The question may seem odd, but I'm blind. I'm here, I said. Who are you? Jack asked. She and Alex had moved further into the room. The younger man came over and closed the door behind them. My name is Ethan Brooke. My colleague here is Mark Damon. Thank you very much for coming in, Mr. Albright. Do you mind if I call you Jack? Please, take a seat. There were 2 leather chairs in front of the desk. Feeling increasingly comfortable, Jack and Alex sat down. The man called Damon walked across and took a third seat at the side. The dog's tail thumped twice against the wooden floor. I know you're in a hurry to get back to London, Brooke began. But let me explain why the two of you are here. The fact of the matter is, we need a little help. You want our help? Jack looked around her. Suddenly, it all made sense. You want Alex. She spoke the words heavily. She now knew who the men were, or at least what they represented. She had met their type before. We'd like to put a proposition to Alex, Brooke agreed. Forget it, he's not interested. Won't you at least listen to what we have to say? Brooke spread his hands. He looked completely reasonable. He could have been a bank manager advising them on their mortgage, or a family lawyer about to read a will. We want the vice. You will have it as soon as I'm done. Alice had said nothing. Jack looked at him, then turned to Brooke and Damon with anger in her eyes. Why can't you people leave him alone? She demanded. Because he's special. In fact, I'd say he's unique. And right now we need him. just for a week or two. But I promise you, Jackie, if he's not interested, he can walk out of here. You can have him on a plane tonight. Just give me a minute to explain. Who are you? Alex asked. Brooke turned toward Damon. Brooke turned towards Damon. We work for ASIS, the younger man replied. The Australian Secret Intelligence Service. Special Operations. Covert Action. Two are more or less the same. You could say we're the rough equivalent of the outfit Alan Blunt runs in London. I've read your file, Alex, Brett added. I have to say I'm impressed. What do you want me for? Alex demanded. I'll tell you. Brooke folded his hands, and to Alex, it seemed somehow inevitable and surprising even. It had happened to him 6 times before. Why not again? Have you ever heard the term snakehead or chateau? Brooke began. There was a silence, so he went on. All right, let me start by saying that the snakehead groups are without doubt the biggest and most dangerous criminal organizations in the world. Compared to them, the mafia, and the triads are amateurs. They have more influence and they're doing more damage than even Al-Qaeda, but they're not interested in religion. They have no beliefs and all they want is money. That's the bottom line. They're gangsters, but on a huge scale. Have you ever bought an illegal DVD? The chances are that he was manufactured and distributed by a snakehead, and profits they have made out of it will have gone straight into one of their other concerns, which you may not find so amusing. Maybe it's drugs or slaves or body parts. You need a new kidney or a heart. Snakeheads operate the biggest market in illegal organs, and they're not fussy about where they get them or weapons. There have been at least 50 wars around the world that have used weapons supplied by the snakehead. Shoulder-launched missiles, AK-47, AK-47s, that sort of thing. Where do you think terrorists go if they want a bomb or a gun or something nasty and biological that comes in a test tube? Think of it as an international supermarket, Alex. But everything it sells is bad. What else can you buy? You name it. Paintings stolen from museums, diamonds mined illegally, using slave labor, ancient artifacts plundered from elephant tusks or tiger skin rugs. A few years ago, 100 kids died in Haiti because someone had sold them cough medicine that happened to contain antifreeze. That was a snakehead, and I don't think it offered anyone their money back. But the biggest moneymaker for the snakeheads is people smuggling. You probably have no idea how many people there are being smuggled from one country to another all around the globe. These are some of the poorest families in the world, desperate to build themselves a new life in the West. Some of them are fleeing from hopelessness and starvation. Others are threatened in their own countries and with prison and torture. Brooke paused and looked directly at Alex, fixing him with his sightless eyes. Half of them are under the age of 18. He said about 5% are younger than you, and they're travelling on their own. The lucky ones get picked up by the authorities. What happens to the rest of them? What happens to the rest of them? You don't want to know. People smuggling is a huge problem for Australia. We have illegal immigrants coming in from Iraq and Afghanistan. They come in boats from Bali, Flores, Lombok and Jakarta. My country used to welcome immigrants. We were all immigrants ourselves once. That's all changed now. And I have to say, the way we treat these people leaves a lot to be decided. What can we do? The answer is we have to stop them coming. To do that, we have to take on snakeheads face to face. There is one snakehead in particular. It operates throughout Indonesia and is more powerful and more dangerous than all the rest. As happens, we know the name of the man in charge, Major U. But that's all we've managed to find out. We don't know what he looks like or where he lives. Twice now we've tried to infiltrate the organisation, that is. We put agents inside pretending to be customers. What happened to them? Jack asked. They both died. It was Damon who had answered the question. And so now I suppose you're thinking about using Alex. We have no idea how our agents were discovered. But Quentin, it was as if Jack hadn't spoken. Somehow this man you seems to know everything we're doing. Either that or he's very careful. Trouble is, these gangs operate under a system known as Granksy. Basically, it means everyone knows everyone. They're like a family, and the fact is, a single agent coming in from outside and operating on his own is too obvious. We need to get inside the Snakehead in a way that is completely original and also above suspicion. A man and a boy, Damon said. We have an agent in Bangkok now. We're going to set him up as a refugee from Afghanistan, planning to be smuggled in Australia. He'll meet with Snakehead and gather names, faces, phone numbers, addresses, anything he can. But he won't be on his own. He'll be travelling with his son. We'll fly you to Bangkok, Damon continued, speaking directly to Alex. You'll join our agent there, and the two of you will be passed down the pipeline back here. And here's the deal. As soon as you're back on Australian soil, we'll send you first class direct to England. You won't have to do anything, Alex. But you'll provide perfect cover. Maybe we'll be able to break up U's network. Use network once and for all. Why Bangkok? There were 100 questions Alex could have asked. This was the first one that came to his mind. Bangkok is a major centre for the sale of false documents, Damon replied. In fact, we'd very much like to know who supplies use people with fake passports, export certificates and the rest of it. Now we have a chance. Our agent has been told to wait until he's contacted. He'll be given the papers he needs, and then he'll continue the journey south. There was a brief silence. Then Jack Starbright shook her head. All right, she said. You've listened to a proposition, Mr. Brooke. Now you can listen to my answer, and it's no, forget it. You said to yourself these people are dangerous. 2 of your spies had already been killed. There's no way I'm going to get let Alex get mixed up in that. I'd have thought, after what Alex has been through, he could make up his own mind, Brooke replied. He can make up his own mind. I'm just telling you what he's going to say. The answer is no. The answer is no. There's only one thing we haven't mentioned. Brooke rested his hands on the desk. His face gave nothing away, but Damon knew what was about to come. His boss was a consummate poker player, only now preparing to show his hand. I didn't tell you the name of our agent in Bangkok. And who is that? Jack asked. You know him, I think. His name is Ash. Jack sat back, unable to keep the shock out of her eyes. Ash! She nodded. That's right. Alex had seen the effect that the name had on her. Who's Ash? He demanded. You don't know him? Brooke was enjoying himself now, though only Damon was aware of it. He turned to Jack. Maybe you'd like to explain. Ash was someone who knew your dad, he muttered. He was more than that, Brooke corrected her. Ash was John Ryder's closest friend. He was the best man at your parents' weddings, Alex. He's also your godfather. Alex couldn't believe what he was hearing. He didn't even know he had a godfather. And for what it's worth, he was the last person to see your parents. And for its worth, he was the last person to see your parents alive. Brooke went on. He was with them the morning they died. He was at the airport when they got on this plane for the south of France. The plane had never arrived. There had been a bomb on board, placed as an act of revenge by Scorpia. That much Alex knew. Alex gazed at Jack. Did you meet him? He was feeling completely disorientated, as if the ground had just been stolen from under his feet. She looked exactly the same. I saw him a few times, she replied. It was just after I started working for your uncle. Ash came to visit. He was checking up on you. After all, he was your godfather. How come you've never mentioned him? He disappeared. You were still very young. He told me he was going far away for good, and I never saw him again. Ash was an agent with MI6, Brooke explained. That was how he and your father met. They worked together as a team. Your dad even saved his life once in Malta. You can ask him about that if you meet. I have thought the two of you. I have a lot to talk about. How can you do this? Jack whispered. She was looking at Brooke with utter contempt. Ash left MI6 a few months after your parents died and immigrated here, Brooke continued. He came with great references, so we were happy to take him on at ASIS. He's been with us ever since. Right now he's in Bangkok, and to go undercover, like I said, but there's nobody better place to pretend to be your father, Alex. When he's almost that already. He'll look after you, and I think you'll find him interesting. What do you say? Alex said nothing. He had already made up his mind, but somehow he knew that Brooke wouldn't need to be told. He had figured that out for himself. I need time, he said at length. Sure, why don't you and Jack go and talk about it? Brooke nodded. Damon produced a white card. He must have had it ready in his pocket from the very start. Here's a number where you can reach me. I'll need to fly you into Bangkok tomorrow, so maybe you could call me. I know what you're thinking, but you can't possibly go, Jack said. It's wrong. Alex and Jack had wandered over to the rocks, the little cluster of shops and cafes that nestled on the very edge of the harbour, right underneath the bridge. Jack had brought them here purposely. She wanted to mingle with the crowds somewhere bright and ordinary, a world apart from the hidden truths and half-lies of the Australian Secret Service. I think I have to. Alex replied, and it was true. Earlier that afternoon, he had promised himself that he would never work for MI6 again. But this was different, and not just because it was the Australians that were asking him. This time, it was Ash. Ash made all the differences, even though the two of them had never met, and it was a name he had only just heard for the first time. Ash can tell me who I am, he said. Don't you know who you are? Not really, Jack. I thought I knew when I was alive. Everything seemed so simple. But then, when I found out the truth about him, it went wrong. All my life, he was training me to be something I never wanted to be. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was what I think I was always meant to be. You think Ash can tell you? I don't know. Alice squinted at Jack. The sunlight was streaming over her shoulders. When did you meet him? He asked. It was a month after I started working for your uncle, she said. At the time, it was just meant to be a vacation job to support myself while I was doing my studies. I didn't know anything about spies, and I certainly didn't know I'd be sticking with you forever. She sighed. You were about 7 years old. Do you really not remember him? I shook his head. He was in London for a few weeks, staying in a hotel, but he came over to the house 2 or 3 times. Now I come to think of it, he never did talk to you very much. Maybe he left awkward with kids. Maybe he felt awkward with kids, but I got to know him a bit. What was he like? Jack thought back. I liked him, she admitted. In fact, if you want the truth, I even went out with him a couple of times, so he was quite a lot older than me. He was very good looking, and there was something dangerous about him. He told me he was a deep-sea diver. It was fun to have around. Is Ash his real name? Is what he calls himself. ASH are his initials, but he never told me what they stood for. And he's really my godfather? Dick nodded. I've seen photos of him at your christening, and I knew him too. The 2 of them were friends. I never knew what he was doing in London, but he was keen to check up on you. He wanted to be sure you were okay. I took a deep breath. You don't know what it's like not having parents, he began. This never bothered me, because I'd never met them. I was so small when they died, but even so, I've often wondered about them, and it sometimes feels like there's a hole in my life, a sort of emptiness. I look back where there's nothing there. Maybe if I spend a bit of time with this man, and even if I have to dress up like an Afghan refugee, it'll fill something for me. But Jack looked at him, and he could see she was afraid. You heard what Brooks said. This could be terribly dangerous. You've been lucky so far, but your luck can't last forever. These people, the Snakehead, they sound horrible. You shouldn't get involved. I have to, Jack. Ash worked with my dad. He saw my parents the day they died. I didn't know he existed until today, but now I do. I've got to meet him. I was to smile. My dad was a spy. My uncle was a spy. Now it turns out I've got a godfather who's a spy. You have to admit, it certainly runs in the family. Jack rested her hands on Alex's shoulders. Behind them, the sun was already setting, reflecting blood red in the water. The shops were beginning to empty. The bridge hung over them, casting a dark shadow. Is there anything I can say to stop you? She asked. Yes. I looked her straight in the eye. But please don't. All right, she nodded. But I'll be worried sick about you. You know, just make sure you look after yourself. And tell Ash for me I want you home by Christmas, and maybe this time, just for once, he'll remember to send a card. Quickly, she turned around and continued walking. I waited a minute, then followed. Bangkok. Snakehead. Another mission. The truth was that I had always suspected it might happen, but even if he hadn't thought it would come so soon. Chapter 6, City of Angels. 24 hours later, Alex touched down at Suvarnabhumi International Airport in Bangkok. Even the name had warned him that he had arrived at the gateway to a completely alien world. For all his travels, he had never been to the East. Now following the 9-hour flight from Sydney, he was here on his own. Jack had wanted to travel with him, but he had decided against it. He had found it easier to say goodbye to her at the hotel. He knew he needed time to prepare himself for what night lay ahead. for what might lie ahead. He had met once or more with Brooke and Damon the night before. There hadn't been much more to say. Alex was booked into a room at the Peninsula Hotel in Bangkok. A driver would pick him up from the airport and take him there. Ash would meet him as soon as he had arrived. You realize we'll have to disguise you, Brooke said. You don't look anything like an Afghan. And I don't speak their language, Alex added. That's not a problem. You're a child and a refugee. No one will be expecting you to say anything. The flight had seemed endless. SAS had booked him into business class, but in a way that made him feel all the more alienated and alone. He watched a film, ate a meal and rested, but nobody spoke to him. He was in a strange metal bubble, surrounded by strangers, being carried once again, towards danger and possibly death. Alex looked out of the window, the brilliant sunlight bouncing off the seemingly solid carpet of cloud, and wondered, was he making a mistake? He could board another plane at Bangkok and be back in London in 12 hours. But he had made his decision. This wasn't about SAS or Snakehead. He was the last person to see your parents alive. I remember what Brooke had told him. He was about to meet his father's best friend, his godfather. This wasn't just a flight from one country to another, it was a journey into his own past. The 747 rumbled into its stall. The fasten your seatbelt signs blinked off, and the passengers stood up as one, scrabbling for the overhead lockers. Alex had one small suitcase and quickly passed through immigration and customs and out into the hot, sticky air of the arrivals hall. Suddenly, he found himself in a crowd of jabbering, gesticulating people. Taxi! Taxi! You want a hotel? You want a hotel? You want a hotel? It felt strange, emerging from business class into this. It was suddenly back to the noise and chaos of the real world, down to earth in more senses than one. And then he saw his name on a black placard being held by a Thai man. Black hair, short, casually dressed, like almost everyone around him. Alice went over to him. Are you Alex? Mr. Ash sent me to collect you. I hope you have a good flight. The car was outside. It was as they made their way out of the airport that Alice noticed the man with the poppy in his buttonhole. It was the poppy that first drew his attention. It was November. It would soon be Remembrance Day back in England. It was just strange to see any sign of it out here. The man was wearing jeans and a leather jacket. He was European, in his 20s, with black hair, cut short, and dark, thoughtful eyes. He had very square features, with high cheekbones and thin lips. The man had stopped dead in his tracks and seemed to be staring at something on the other side of the arrivals lounge. It took Alex a moment to realise that the man's attention was actually fixed on him. Did they know each other? He was just asking himself that question, and a crowd of people moved between them, making for the exit. When the floor cleared again, the man had gone. He must have imagined it. He was tired after the long flight. Maybe the man had simply been one of the other passengers on the plane. I just followed the driver to the car park, and a few minutes later, they were on the wide 3-lane motorway that led into Bangkok, or as the Thai people call it, Krang Thep, City of Angels. Sitting in the back of the air-conditioned car, gazing out of the window, Alex wondered how it had got the name. He certainly wasn't impressed by his first sight of the city, a sprawl of ugly, old-fashioned skyscrapers, blocks of flats piled up on top of each other like discarded boxes, electricity pylons and satellite towers. They stopped at a pay toll where a woman sat in a cramped cubicle, her face hidden behind the white mask that protected her from the traffic fumes. Then they were off again. Alex saw a huge portrait of a man next to the road, black hair, glasses, open neck shirt. It was painted on the entire side of a building, 20 stories high, covering both the bookcases and the windows. "That's our king," the driver explained. Alex looked again at the portrait. What would it be like, he wondered, to work at a desk inside an office, to pound away at a computer for 8 or 9 hours a day, but to look out at Bangkok through the eye of a king? They left the motorway, driving down a ramp into a dense, chaotic world of shrubs and food stalls, traffic jams, and policemen at every intersection, their whistles screaming like dying birds. Alex saw tuk-tuks, motorized rickshaws, bicycles and buses that looked as if they'd been welded together from a dozen different models. He felt a hollow feeling in his stomach. What was he letting himself in for? How was he going to adapt to a country that was, in every last detail, so different from his own? Then the car turned the corner. They'd entered the driveway of the Peninsula Hotel. Alex learned something else about Bangkok. It was two cities, one very poor and one very rich, living side by side, and yet with a great gulf between them. His journey brought him from one to the other. Now he was passing through a beautifully tended tropical garden. As they drew up at the front entrance, half a dozen men in perfect white uniforms hurried forward to help. One to take the luggage, one to help Alex out, 2 more bowing to welcome him, 2 holding open the hotel doors. The remnants of the hotel's air conditioning reached out to welcome him. Alex crossed the wide marble floor towards the reception area. Piano music tinkling somewhere in the background, and was handed a garland of flowers by a smiling receptionist. Nobody seemed to have noticed that he was only 14. He was a guest, and that was all that mattered. His key was already waiting for him. He was shown into a lift himself the size of a small room. The door slid shut. Only the pressure in his ears told him that they had begun the journey up. His room was on the 19th floor. 10 minutes later, he stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling window. At the view, his suitcase was on his bed. He was shown the luxury bathroom, the widescreen TV, the well-stocked fridge, and the complimentary basket of exotic fruit. Alex tried to shrug off the heavy fingers of jet lag. He knew he had little enough time to prepare himself for what lay ahead. The city was spread out from the other side of a wide brown river that curved and twisted as far as he could see. Skyscrapers towered in the far distance. Nearby there were hotels, temples, palaces with perfect lawns standing alongside them, shacks and slum houses, and warehouses so dilapidated they looked as if they might fall over at any time. All manner of boats were making their way up and down the murky water. Some were modern, carrying coal and iron. Some were ferries with strange curving roofs like like floating pagodas. The nimblest were elongated, long and wafer thin, with a driving wheeling wearily over the tiller and the stern. The sun was setting, and the sky was huge and grey. He was looking at a television screen with a colour control down the telephone line. Alex went over and picked it up. "Hello? Is that Alex?" It was the man's voice. Alex could make up a slight Australian accent. "Yes," he replied. "You arrived? Okay then." "Yes, thanks." "You arrived? Okay. Yes, thanks. I'm in the reception. You feel like a bit of dinner?" Alex wasn't hungry, but that didn't matter. Even though the man hadn't introduced himself, he knew he was talking to him. "I'll come straight down yet." He hadn't had time to shower or change after the flight. It would just have to wait. Alex left the room and took the lift back down. It stopped twice on the way, letting people in on the ninth floor and 7th floor. Alex stood silently in the corner. He was suddenly nervous, but he wasn't sure why. Finally they arrived. The lift doors opened. Ash was standing in the reception area, dressed in a blue linen jacket, a white shirt and jeans. There were plenty of other people around, but Alex recognised him instantly, and somehow he wasn't surprised. He wasn't even surprised. They had met before. Ash was the soldier in the forest, the man who had told him he was standing on a mine. It was all set up, wasn't it? Alex said. "The training exercise, the minefield, all of it." "Yeah," Ash nodded. "I expect that must make you pretty annoyed." "You could say that," Alex growled. There was the eating area just outside the hotel. A hotel softly lit, with a river in front and a long, narrow swimming pool to one side. The two of them were sitting at a table, facing each other. Ash had a cigar beer. He had ordered Alex a fruit cocktail, orange, pineapple, guava blended with crushed ice. It was almost dark now, but Alex could still feel the heat of the evening pressing down on him. He realised it was going to take time to get used to the climate in Bangkok. The air was like syrup. He looked again at his godfather, the man who had known him when he was a baby. Ash was leaning back with his legs stretched out, untroubled by the trick that had been painted in the forest near Swanbourne, out of uniform with his shirt open and silver chain glinting around his neck. He looked nothing like a soldier or a spy. It was more like a film star with curly black hair, rough beard and suntanned skin. Physically, he was slim. Weary was the word that sprung Alex's mind, fast-moving rather than particularly strong. He had brown eyes that were very dark, and I guessed he could easily play the part of an Afghan. He certainly didn't look European. There was something else about it, and Alex found it hard to place. A certain guarded quality in the eyes, a sense of tension. He might look relaxed, but he never would be. He had been touched by something at some time, and it would never let him go. So why did you do it? I thought. It was a test, Alex. What do you think? Ash had a soft, lilting voice. 14 years he had spent in Australia had given him an accent, but Alex could hear the English there too. We weren't going to use a 14-year-old boy, not even you. Not unless we were damn sure you weren't going to panic at the first sign of danger. Didn't panic with Scudrevan or with Scorpia. The snakeheads are different. You have no idea how dangerous. You have no idea how dangerous. You have no idea what sort of people we're up against. Didn't book tell you? They already killed 2 of our agents. The first one came home, minus his head. They sent the second back in an envelope. They'd had him cremated to save us the trouble. I drank his beer and signalled to the waiter for another. I had to see for myself that you were after the job, he went on. We created a situation that would have terrorised any normal kid. Then we watched how you got on with it. I could have been killed. Alex remembered how the first bomb had blown him off his feet. He wasn't in any real danger. All the missiles were launched with pinpoint accuracy. We knew exactly where you were all the time. How? Asked Smart. There was a beacon inside the heel. There was a beacon inside the heel of one of your trainers. Colonel Abbott arranged that while you were asleep, sent out a signal to the nearest millimeter. What about the mine? It had less explosives in it than you probably thought, and it was activated by remote control. I sent it off a couple of seconds after he made that dive. You did pretty well, by the way. You're watching me all the time. Just put it behind you, Alex. It was a test. You passed. That's all that matters. The waiter arrived with the second beer. I lit a cigarette. Alex was surprised to see that he smoked and blew smoke out into the warm evening air. I can't believe we're finally meeting, he said. He examined Alex closely. You look a hell of a lot like your dad. You close to him? Yeah, we were close. And my mother? I don't want to talk about them, Alex. I shifted uncomfortably, then reached out and drank some of his second beer. Do you mind? It was all a long time ago. My life moved on since then. It's the only reason I'm here, Alex said. There was a long silence. I smiled briefly. How is that housekeeper of yours? He asked. Jack, what's her name? What's her name? Is she still with you? Yes. She said hello. She was an attractive girl. I liked her. I'm glad she stuck by you. You didn't. Well, I moved on. I paused, and suddenly he leaned forward. His face was deadly serious, and I saw that this was a tough, cold-hearted man, and that he was going to have to watch himself when they were together. All right, this is how you're going to play it, he began. You're in this smart, luxury hotel because I wanted to ease you in. But mind that all comes to an end. We're going to have breakfast, and then we're going up to your room, and you're going to become an Afghan boy, a refugee. We're going to change the way you look, and the way you walk, and even the way you smell. And then we're going out there. He pointed across the river. You enjoy your bed tonight, Alex, because where you sleep tomorrow night is going to be very different. Trust me, you're not going to like it. He lifted a cigarette and inhaled. Grey smoke curled out of the corner of his mouth. We should make contact with the snakehead in the next few days, he went on. I'll explain all that tomorrow, but this is what you've got to understand. You do nothing. You say nothing unless I tell you. You play dumb. And if I think the situation's getting out of hand, if I think you're in danger, you'll clear out with no argument. Do you understand? Yes. Alex was taken back. This wasn't what he had expected. It wasn't what he'd flown 5,000 miles to hear. I softened. But I'll make you this promise. We're going to be spending a lot of time together. And when I feel I know you better, when the time is right, I'll tell you everything you want to know about your father, about what happened in Malta, about your mother, about you. The only thing I'll never talk to you about is the way they died. I was there. I saw it, and I don't want to But is that okay with you? I nodded. Right then, let's get some food in us. I forgot to mention the stuff you'll be eating from now on may not be your taste either. And you can tell me a bit about yourself. I'd like to know what school you go to and if you have a girlfriend and things like that. Let's enjoy the evening. There may not be a lot of fun ahead. Alice picked up his menu like it was the same, but before he could read a movie book, caught his eye. It was just Chantilly. The hotel had a river, a white, spacious boat with empty chairs placed at intervals on a polished wooden floor. He was going into reverse had made Alice look up. A man was climbing aboard. Alice thought he recognized him, and his suspicion was confirmed when the man turned around and looked purposefully in his direction. The puppy had gone, but it was the man from the airport. I was sure of it. A coincidence. The man hurried on board, disappearing beneath the canopy, as if anxious to get out of sight. But Alice knew that there was no chance about it. The man had spotted him in the arrivals lounge and followed him here. Alice wondered if he should mention it to Ash, or was that once he decided against it. It was impossible for the Snakehead to know that he was here, and if he made a fuss, if Ash decided he had been compromised, he might be sent home before the mission had even begun. And it was better to keep quiet. If he saw the man a third time, then he would speak out. So Alex said nothing. He didn't even watch as the ferry began its crossing back to the other side. Nor did he hear the click of the camera with its special night scope and long-distance lens trained on him as his picture was taken. Again and again with a dwindling light. Right, everybody, that's the end of me reading this book. So goodbye, everyone, and thank you for listening to this. Goodbye, everyone, and thank you for listening to this.